On December 17, 1953, Hughes established the Howard Hughes Medical Institute, although the true motivations behind this move remain a subject of debate.
He solved all of his problems by creating this tax-exempt charitable organization. And the really interesting part, of course, is that the taxpayers pick up the bill for it, because in its first or second or third years of existence, the Medical Institute, about 84% of its revenue it returns to Howard Hughes, and it spends about 1% of its revenue on actual medical research. And you go through the years, it gets something like $2 million from Hughes Aircraft Company. And in the same period of time, it pays something like $22 or $23 million to Howard Hughes as interest payments and lease payments. And so it was really the ultimate charity.
By 1955, Hughes had amassed a remarkable empire, spanning various industries and endeavors. Of special note was Hughes Aircraft, a company which was doing groundbreaking research in electronics and pioneering high-tech electronic weaponry. At his office on 7000 Romaine Street, Hughes began systematically isolating himself from business contacts through a division called Operations. This peculiar organization was masterminded by assistant Bill Gay, a devout Mormon who recruited fellow church members to serve as operators, drivers, and personal aides to Hughes.
He had one particular section of it, which was in effect like a control panel, almost like a dispatcher's desk. You think of it as in a police department. Somebody manned it 24 hours a day, receiving calls from various parts of the empire.
And these were attorneys, as well as people with the Hughes Tool Company, vice presidents, presidents, and airline people, and on and on and on. So that would consume hours just to get everybody notified of what was going on.
This was a device by remote control that enabled him to keep various parts of his empire in check and to respond to their demands when he wanted without having to directly confront a particular need.
Despite his efforts to insulate himself from certain decisions, Hughes found himself unable to evade the repercussions of purchasing a new fleet of jets for TWA. The complex selection and financing process pushed Hughes to the brink of mental collapse. In a surprising move, Hughes parted ways with Noah Dietrich, his closest advisor of 32 years. That same year, he married longtime acquaintance Gene Peters.
There are all kinds of theories at the time that he was possibly going to be committed for some mental problems, which is one of the reasons supposedly Noah Dietrich fell out of favor. By being married, could only get the cooperation of a wife to assist in that process.
And I remember, never forget one night, she was walking out of the hotel, and I said, "Hello, Jean, how are you?" And she turned to me and she says, "Have you seen Howard lately?" Which is I thought was very strange, because now she was married to him at the time.
From then on, you also see a gradual mental decline in terms of those problems in his personality: fear of germs, phobias about disease and illness, an increasing desire to isolate himself from other human beings.
I found him in the garden of the Beverly Hills Hotel, wandering around, all alone, dressed. And I said, "What are you doing here?" He said, "I just came here to look around." I said, "Come in and have a drink with him." He said, "No, I'm going to pass, Johnny." And that's the last time I saw Howard.
Under mounting pressure from the TWA decision, Hughes sought solace by retreating to the Bahamas, where he isolated himself in a darkened hotel suite. During this time, he planned substantial real estate investments, enlisting the help of former CIA operative Bob Mayhew. Mayhew had previously freelanced for Hughes, primarily conducting surveillance on ex-girlfriends and recruiting aspiring starlets. Before departing the Bahamas, Hughes contracted Mayhew and entrusted him with a more significant role in managing his empire.
He explained to me that he did not want to make any public appearances in the future, that he wanted me to become his alter ego. He wanted me to convince the world that when they spoke to me, they in reality were speaking to Howard Hughes.
After 6 months of exile from the TWA ordeal, Hughes returned to Los Angeles and took up residence in the Beverly Hills Hotel. There, he began orchestrating a peculiar world within his rented bungalow. Although his room was cluttered with debris, he declared it a germ-free zone, and his staff of personal aides followed very precise methods while attending to Hughes.
For example, if you're going to open a can of food, you have to cover your hands with tissue paper when you take the can opener to open. The bowl that the food goes into must be cleaned vigorously before that happens. When you open a car door for him to get into, you must hold the tissues over the car door.
His Romaine Street staff prepared a thick procedures manual for those working closely with Hughes.
Step number 3, washing of can. He should first soak and remove the label, and then brush the cylindrical part of the can over and over until all particles of dust, pieces of paper, and in general, all sources of contamination have been removed.
He wanted the drapes closed so people couldn't look in from outside. And at that particular time, he had me instruct the people to dip rags in alcohol and wipe all the doorknobs, so there'd be no germs on all the doorknobs.
And they had to be sanitized, so to speak. In other words, the windows had to be closed, they had to be scotch taped down and so on, et cetera, et cetera.
He wouldn't shake hands with people and didn't want people touching him.
I think we bought up all the cosmetic gloves in Beverly Hills. I don't see how they could make any more movies till they ordered some more cosmetic gloves. You're supposed to keep them on all the time. Little white gloves.
It is equally important to me that nobody ever opens any door or opening to any room, cabinet, or closet, or anything used to store any of my things, even for 1,000th of an inch, for 1,000th of a second. I don't want the possibility of dust or insects or anything of that nature entering.
Open the door as little as you can and get in before the bugs and everything gets in, and then close it again quickly. That's all.
Hughes rarely bathed and went naked with increasing frequency. He spent a great deal of his time cleaning anything within reach with his endless supply of Kleenex. He stopped screening films at the studio and instead had them delivered to the bungalow. His drug use had increased, and a constant stream of messengers hand-delivered bottles of codeine to the Hughes staff. When lonely, he would often call for an aide to sit silently in the bungalow.
Well, he was sitting at his table over on there, and there's 2 other chairs in the room, and he, for some reason, just said, "Chuck, that's your chair." So every time I went in there, I would sit in that same goddamn chair. And we didn't talk to him. He talked to you. He said, "Chuck, yeah, what time is it?" So we were there at different hours back and forth. So I would get up to go over and show him my watch. And then I'd start to say, "It's 3:30, Mr. Hughes." "Shh, don't say a thing." You didn't tell him what it was. You put your watch in front of him and let him decide what time it was.
Howard Hughes built his own prison, and he made sure that you couldn't escape from it. He did it himself. He just had these aides surround him, and if you needed to talk to Hughes, you didn't talk to him.
And what's sad is that most of those around him at the time were completely catering to this phobia. There wasn't one person around him who said, "Howard, this is crazy, this is silly, these things aren't going to bother you." I mean, they treated this seriously, like this was a matter of national security.
When his fear of germs subsided, Hughes was able to lapse into periods of clear thought. During one of these secluded periods, Hughes successfully negotiated financing for the fleet of TWA jets.
But the way he worked out the financing was not acceptable in some ways to the TWA president and the executives of TWA.
Suit was filed against Hughes for mismanagement.
It wasn't too long after that when Hughes, for various reasons, sold all of his TWA stock at a figure which was about 86 per share, almost higher than it had ever been.
Well, the check was for $546,549,771.00.
Which I believe was probably the largest business check ever written in the United States.
That was a fair piece of change. Yes, a fair piece of change.
Advised to leave California to avoid hefty taxes on his newfound windfall, Hughes made an uncharacteristic move by traveling by train, first to Boston and then onward to Las Vegas. Under the guidance of Bob Mayhew, Hughes was discreetly ushered into the Desert Inn through a service entrance, where he and his aides settled into suites on the penthouse floor. Hughes would remain in near constant isolation there for the next 4 years. His prolonged stay eventually led to tensions with the Desert Inn's owners, who sought to reclaim control of their lucrative high roller suites.
Came a time later where they had given an instruction to the security guards that if Hughes was not vacated in 48 hours, that they would bodily come up to the 9th floor and kick him out of the hotel.
They were very unhappy when Hughes didn't want to leave, so it ended up that we started negotiations and finally made the deal in March to acquire the hotel.
Now, in other words, he bought the hotel because he needed a place to sleep.
However, during negotiations, Hughes' tax attorney presented a solution. Casino receipts could be classified as active income, resolving his tax predicament.
He was in ecstasy. He called me and he said, "Imagine, this is money from heaven. Are there any more of these joints available?"
And so after that, we started to buy more hotels. He got excited about it and had all this cash laying around, so to speak.
About that time, he made up his mind that he wanted to be the biggest in the gaming business.
Empowered by this revelation, Hughes embarked on a spending spree, acquiring ownership of the Desert Inn, Sands, Castaways, Frontier, Silver Slipper, and Landmark casinos.
Well, Las Vegas at that time had that image of being the center of organized crime, that organized crime was very deeply involved in it.
And Mr. Hughes came in and purchased those casinos that the state felt they were having trouble with, and he was very welcome in that regard.
He shifted the emphasis, the public emphasis from Las Vegas, the organized crime people, to Las Vegas, the billionaire industrialist.
The state of Nevada granted exceptions for its most renowned citizen.
Historically, everyone who asks for a Nevada gambling license has to personally appear before the Gaming Control Board or Gaming Commission.
And in each case, he refused to make an appearance. He refused to furnish fingerprints, contemporary photos, or financials.
That was one of my responsibilities as well, incidentally, to convince the state gaming licensing authorities not to require his personal appearance. So they adopted what they call the Hughes rule.
Hughes was not content with being the biggest in the gaming industry. He also sought to influence governments citywide and statewide.
Mr. Hughes wanted to have a summary of every bill introduced in the Nevada legislature, and he wanted me to pass on his comments to the legislator, which I did. He had an insatiable appetite to want his views to be known and be accepted as far as certain legislation was concerned. He's a very bright human being. Most of the things he requested me to do, and Mr. Mayhew to do, not all of them, but most of them, were good recommendations. Some of them we couldn't carry out.
From his penthouse perch, Hughes issued a challenging request: halt the construction of the International Hotel. His rationale? Hughes believed that owner Kirk Kerkorian was stealing his spotlight.
It was almost funny. I mean, when he gave me the assignment to try to dissuade Kerkorian from building the big International, I could not succeed because Kirk had made up his mind that that's what he was going to do.
And we said, okay, we'll go ahead, but we really couldn't do it. And we really didn't try because it was an embarrassing situation to try and stop another hotel from being built.
He had me talk to Kirk on on many instances, trying to discourage him because of the underground testing that all the high-rise hotels would collapse. And Kirk just went about his business. And although he was always very friendly to Mr. Hughes, but he didn't pay a damn bit of attention to what we had to say.
Showcasing his irrational thought process and its detrimental impact to his own hotel's profitability.
The Tournament of Champions was at the Desert Inn. It was a regular annual golf tournament that brought in the best pros and a lot of stars and a lot of tourists. And Hughes canceled the Tournament of Champions.
And to think that you would take this kind of an asset and just say, we'll turn it over gratis to someone else if they'll take us off the hook, was incomprehensible to me. Yes, it bothered me. And of course, the fact that his reason was that it would create too many germs bothered me even more.
Obsessed with control, Hughes seemed to envision dominion over the entirety of Nevada. From his darkened penthouse, he meticulously charted maps outlining his latest acquisitions, including vast stretches of underdeveloped land, the North Las Vegas airport, numerous mining claims, and a television station acquired not only for investment, but also for his personal amusement.
He wanted to watch the movies that he wanted to watch on television. He was watching a lot of television. And so I think maybe that was the motivation for buying that station.
Howard Hughes would watch the movies all night long, and as a general rule, he would have an aide call the next day complaining about the movie that ran last night. And this was almost an everyday occurrence. It would happen a lot.
He was the one that decided what movies were going to be shown, what was available, and get this movie from California. And so it ended up that whatever movie was scheduled, if he didn't want to run that, he'd say, I want to see this.
While Hughes whiled away the hours watching films broadcast by his TV station, Bob Mayhew assumed an increasingly influential role within the Hughes empire. Despite never having met Hughes, Mayhew held the title of head of Hughes Nevada's operations.
And consequently, we began using the Romaine Street office in Hollywood less and less.
He very strongly told me, upon his arrival in Las Vegas, that not only did he want a complete severance from the group at 7000 Romaine, which was Bill Gay and his associates, but he didn't want any of them to even come to Las Vegas.
And there was a power play going on between Bill Gay, Chester Davis, and Bob Mayhew. They were getting shunted farther aside, and Mayhew was coming up in the ranks.
Bill Gay, Frank William Gay, real name, but everybody called him Bill. Bill formulated his power, if that's the correct word, power. He formulated his authority in that he controlled the aides who surrounded Howard Hughes.
The aides really became his family, and they supplied his food. They gave him the drugs he took every day, whether it was the Valium or codeine or whatever. They were his whole life support system.
Nobody had direct access to Hughes. The aides had direct access to Hughes, and Bill Gay had direct access to the aides. So if you wanted to talk to Hughes, you had to talk to Bill, and Bill in turn had to talk to the aides.
Unaware of the internal machinations within his empire, Hughes remained fixated on television. It was while engrossed in a program that Hughes stumbled upon news of a new round of atomic testing planned for Nevada, sending him into a state of paralyzing fear. He knew that unlike the germs that he fought to shield himself from, radiation could not be prevented from entering his carefully guarded environment. He declared war on the Atomic Energy Commission and pledged unlimited resources in stopping the tests.
That's one of the reasons he established that power in Nevada. He was, trying to pull a lot of political strings to get that atomic testing stopped.
I recall a particular test called, it was codenamed Boxcar. And it was a large underground nuclear test. I think they were figuring it was about equal to about 1 million tons of TNT, megaton. And Hughes absolutely wanted that thing stopped.
He bent every effort humanly possible to stop the test in Nevada at the test site. But we were unsuccessful in that regard. And we had to stop pushing too hard because it was becoming embarrassing.
I remember numerous briefings with the Department of Energy prior to the boxcar detonation. And I know that the reason that occurred was on the other side of the street. The Hughes people are saying, you can't do this, you've got to stop this.
These were genuine concerns, and he wrote memo after memo on these subjects in trying to get the test stopped.
I say Nevada is no longer so desperate for mere existence that it has to accept and swallow with a smile poisonous, contaminated radioactive waste material more horrible than human excrement.
Unable to prevent the boxcar test, Hughes intensified his efforts to influence the upcoming presidential election, seeking support from any candidate who would succeed outgoing President Lyndon Johnson.
To put all this in true perspective, what happened is that Hughes made a decision on the same day, wrote me a memo telling me that he wanted me to see Richard Nixon as soon as possible and offer him unlimited help with his campaign because it was very important that he, Richard Nixon, be the next president of the United States. The same day, he sent me another memo saying to go see Hubert Humphrey and offer him unlimited support because it was very important that he be the next president of the United States.
Despite this, he also attempted a last-ditch effort to appeal to President Johnson himself.
Well, on 2 occasions, he wanted me to offer $1 million to then presidents to try to stop the underground testing. And by that time, I had reached a point in my world with him where I knew that I had to give him the impression that I was doing it for fear that he'd give the assignment to someone who'd be stupid enough to try.
By 1970, Hughes' health was visibly deteriorating. Logs maintained his aides revealed his increasing reliance on narcotics, including both oral and injectable forms of codeine, as well as massive doses of Valium, which Hughes referred to as blue bombers. This drug dependency led to chronic constipation, necessitating frequent enemas. Hughes even insisted on preserving his urine in jars stored in the closet of his penthouse. With his health failing, Hughes slept more and ate less. His kidneys suffered from the effects of his 2-decade-long addiction to codeine. Meanwhile, his marriage to Jean Peters had deteriorated to the point where she had not seen him in over 3.5 years, prompting her to file for divorce. In the midst of these personal struggles, another battle emerged between Bob Mayhew and Hughes' personal aides, who were tightening their grip on Hughes' affairs.
I began to get the impression that some of my memos were not getting through to him.
That's probably where Mayhew may have misjudged, is that they still controlled the flow of information. And that was the ultimate test. They determined, what information got to Hughes and whether Mayhew's information got to Hughes. And that was very critical, absolutely.
Communications shut down. Nobody could communicate. I had some very important things I had to communicate through Mayhew, through Bob Mayhew, and Mayhew had no communication with him. They just shut us down. And you obviously sensed something wrong in that situation.
I think Mayhew was an empire builder, and I think he enjoyed the power and the position that he had in representing Hughes's interests. But I think he allocated to himself certain powers and privileges that were a little excessive.
I think jealousy, envy, and the fact that it looked like Mayhew was building his own empire within the Hughes empire that caused the demise of Bob Mayhew.
There's no doubt in my mind that they convinced him that I, in fact, had stolen money from him. And it breaks my heart to think that Howard Hughes died without knowing the difference.
On November 13th, 1970, a proxy came over the telecopier in the Desert Inn penthouse. It finalized an action that had been in the planning stages for months. Upon obtaining Hughes' signature, the proxy effectively transferred control of Hughes Nevada Holdings to executive Bill Gay and Chester Davis, a TWA attorney closely associated with the Hughes. On November 25th, 1970, the Desert Inn penthouse was empty.
They took this man out of here Thanksgiving Eve. It was a very cold night. When his doctor had told me 2 days earlier that he was so sick that he would not move him from the Desert Inn Sunrise Hospital, which is not a mile away, unless it were a dire emergency.
Well, he clearly was not in good physical shape when he left the desert. And I mean, you were looking at someone who, who was consuming large quantities of Valium, codeine, other drugs.
Interestingly, it was later revealed that despite Hughes's critical illness, the quantities of codeine and Valium made available to him, and apparently consumed by him in the weeks leading up to the proxy's acquisition, reached some of the highest levels in his life.
They took this man on this night, waltzed him down 9 flights of exterior fire escape, and brought him to Nellis Airport and flew him to the Bahamas.
The contact that law enforcement and that media and that the public had, as far as Hughes, was Bob Mayhew. And Bob Mayhew sincerely believed that Hughes was forced to leave here against his will.
But there was some confusion as to who was a leader, who was in power, who should the political people listen to.
I began getting calls from the casino managers saying the people were moving into the cages. I called the governor. I said, has this been cleared with you? No. I called the Gaming Control Board. Has this been cleared with you? No. Call the Gaming Commission? No.
Mayhew was saying, I'm in charge. Holliday, Davis, and Gay were saying, no, we're in charge. And it was like a war. It was going on. One camp was headquartered at the Sands. Another camp was headquartered at the Frontier.
That confusion lasted for several months until it finally, the papers were sent in, powers of attorney were sent in to the government officials, placing Chester Davis and others in charge. So that was sufficient for them to feel comfortable that Mayhew was out and the new people were in.
I was sick. But then I realized that the battle was over. I realized that somehow, whatever they had done, they had convinced him that I was on the wrong side of the fence.
In early December, Hughes retreated to a penthouse at the Britannia Beach Hotel on Paradise Island, seeking respite from the troubles that plagued him in Las Vegas. Little did he know that a man he had never met would soon become a significant problem: Clifford Irving. Irving, an author with 8 books to his name, including the popular Fake, which centered on art forgeries, embarked on a far more audacious scheme in 1971. He claimed to be collaborating with Hughes on an autobiography and forged letters purportedly written by Hughes to substantiate his claim. Convinced by the forged documents, the McGraw-Hill Publishing Company advanced Irving $100,000 for the publishing rights. Despite denials of authenticity from the Hughes Tool Company, there was no feasible way to bring Hughes out of isolation to refute the claims. Irving seemingly crafted the perfect scam, for no one had so much as seen Hughes for over a decade, and many questioned his very existence.
Then it got to be of concern to, I don't know whether it was probably government officials as well as the public. Does Howard Hughes exist? Is he alive?
There was a very serious thought in the public and among many people who were in areas of authority that thought he was probably dead. And these people were merely speaking for him.
In an attempt to placate nervous Nevada gaming officials, Hughes placed a call to former Governor Paul Laxalt. Hughes' mental condition at the time seems questionable, given the memo that was passed to him before the call was placed.
Your conversation should be exactly as the script was outlined to you. Make it most emphatic, with no discussion as to why, just a confirmation. However, it would be a good idea to mention your loss of confidence in Mayhew. And you could end by emphasizing your intention to return to Las Vegas after your business trip.
One of them said to me, they said, wait a minute, he talked on the phone to your predecessor, and, he was satisfied. Well, I said, I'm not my predecessor. I like my predecessor, Paul Laxalt, but I can't tell on the phone whether this is Howard Hughes or not.
In an effort to dispel confusion surrounding the Clifford Irving hoax, it was arranged for Hughes to address a group of reporters via telephone, a group who had known him before his reclusive years.
Hughes called me up from the Britannia Beach Hotel in the Bahamas the day before, and he says, I'm going to come out and expose Clifford Irving big hoax. And he said, I'm going to have a press conference, which I'll talk on phone. He said, I want you on it. We assembled in this room, and all the other reporters, asked all kinds of trick questions. Make sure it was Howard Hughes and not Richard Little. And, of course, when it came my turn, I said, I know that voice anywhere. He said, I've heard it too many times. It's etched in my memory.
When questioned about Clifford Irving, Hughes simply responded with, I don't know him. However, reporters took the opportunity to probe further, delving into more personal matters.
Someone asked him about his report that he had fingernails 10 inches long. And, he laughed about it. He says, how in the hell could I write my name?
And all the correspondents chuckle at it as well. Like, these stories are exaggerated. But the stories weren't exaggerated. He was just that loony at the time. But what is intriguing about him is that he knew the outside world would frown on him if they knew he was that way.
And I, at that time, made a remark that as far as I was concerned, there's nothing but a big circus. They said, oh yeah, that's his voice. Well, what's the big deal? Why don't we just see this voice? If everything is fine? And so we had some doubts on whether or not he was really in control of his company.
Over the next 7 months, Hughes and his aides embarked on a global journey to evade corporate lawsuits and the relentless pursuit of photographers aiming to capture a glimpse of the elusive billionaire. At each destination, Hughes retreated to the familiar sanctuary of a darkened hotel suite. Constantly medicated, Hughes spent most of his waking hours engrossed in films projected on a screen at the foot of his bed. Unaware of the ongoing TWA lawsuit, he was in no state to engage in the fight, even as executives urged him to sell his namesake, the Hughes Tool Division.
TWA ultimately sued Hughes and was awarded a substantial judgment. And Hughes Tool Company, which had provided all the money through the years to fund all of Howard's various enterprises, from the filmmaking to the airplanes to everything, Howard gets enormous pressure to sell it. And this is at a time when he's really totally isolated, under the control of the people who are around him every day.
But I'm sure he had long-standing feelings of closeness, and he probably had some regret in having to let it go.
He lost roughly $1/3 $1 billion as a result of that sale. It was probably one of the worst business decisions ever made. In the 5 years after he sold the company, he had made more than he received for it, which was something like $150 million. And this is one of the times you see the really tragic side of Hughes's life, because he's convinced he has to sell it. He sells it. The judgment, of course, is later overturned. He really didn't have to.
One person who gained from the sale was Bill Gay, who now became executive vice president.
One person who gained from the sale was Bill Gay, who now became executive vice president.
Was supposedly based on word from on high. It wasn't until after Hughes' death that we began to wonder if anybody ever did, if Hughes ever did make those pronouncements.
The new executive committee opted to consolidate the remaining Hughes Nevada holdings under an umbrella corporation.
The new company that is created for the remainder of his holdings is called Summa Corporation. And when he first sees the name, he doesn't even understand what it is.
If you stop and consider all of the companies that Hughes owned prior to Summa were all Hughes. There was Hughes Aircraft, Hughes Helicopters, Hughes this, Hughes Oil Company, Hughes Tool Company, Hughes, whatever it was, had Hughes in the name. Summa suddenly became the first company that didn't have a Hughes name on it, Summa.
It's one of those really sad points when you realize here is his, the business that provided the basis for everything that he did is gone. In the surviving business, he doesn't even know what the name means.
In March of 1973, Hughes relocated once more, this time to the Inn on the Park Hotel in London. There, he briefly emerged from his self-imposed isolation to agree to a face-to-face meeting with Governor O'Callaghan.
We went up late at night, it's after midnight, to meet with him. And they brought him in. He walked in, and we shook hands, and we sat down, and I asked the questions that had to be asked to make sure that that we had the right person. Here's a man who was alive. It was his money, and he wanted to do this with his money, and that's fine.
He had to find someplace where a now deteriorating individual whose health was deteriorating could, in fact, live easily. His last port of call, of course, was Mexico.
During this period, Hughes was informed that he had been moved to Acapulco under the guise of a lack of available drugs in Freeport. However, the reality was that drugs were being supplied by a pharmaceutical company based in New York.
He is no longer probably mentally in control, of his complete faculties. It would certainly appear that way when you're looking at the memos he's writing and you're looking at all the drugs he's consuming.
I'm not so sure the new people that came on board thought about protecting him at all. They may have thought only about themselves and how they could enhance their own lives.
You also saw this by virtue of the fact that the people were, back in those days, trying to get him to, well, where's your will? Get the will all in shape. There was a lot of concern.
Hughes never gave anything of the company away. He never gave anything of the company away. So everybody was trying to get a secure position.
Some of those aides at that time were making $75,000 a year for delivering messages, taking telephone calls. That may not seem like a lot of money today, but if you go back in time, in that year, median family income, meaning the average family in the U.S. was earning $12,000. So if you were looking at that today, you would be paying these people to do these errand jobs almost $250,000.
I can go down that whole list. If I were in the headhunting business, I don't know where I'd start to find any one of them a $10,000 job.
The final days of Howard Hughes stood in stark contrast to the image of the man who once wielded such formidable control over his life. Hughes had become so weakened that he could no longer summon the strength to inject himself with codeine.
There was a story on the wire about a doctor in Mexico that had examined Hughes, and he was the first indication that I read, this is prior to many books that were published, that Hughes was definitely in very poor physical condition when he got to him.
He's got bed sores all over him. He's got a gaping sore on his head, bruises. And although the doctor doesn't see those, he's got broken hypodermic needles in his arm.
And it wasn't the kind of physical condition that had just developed during a week or so of illness. It was the kind of physical condition that apparently developed over many years of either a lifestyle or neglect.
The doctor's just looking at him physically and saying, why isn't this man in a hospital? And that's really a sad picture of a person who is deteriorated to that point, and no one really seems to care.
And it's not the Howard Hughes that I knew. He was helpless, really helpless.
Probably the most striking thing is this picture of a man who basically is all alone.
While there are the aides around him and people who have been around him for a long period of time, there isn't what you would call anybody really close to him.
I hate to think so, but I think he probably was very sad at the end. He had no more TWA, no more spruce goose, no more studio. He just had a lot of money.
On April 5th, 1976, Hughes slipped into a coma. His body lay still, except for tremors in the muscles of his face. Hughes' personal physician was summoned to the penthouse, but upon arrival, instead of promptly attending to the comatose Hughes, he spent nearly 2 hours rummaging through the files kept in the suite.
He began shredding documents that were in the hotel. And I have a feeling that there was a lot of this going on throughout the Hughes organization in those last days. A lot of documents were being destroyed. And the question always is, what were they and why?
4 hours later, Hughes was transported by air ambulance to Houston.
Had a beard, long, scraggly type hair, gray hair, and just a very shriveled up type of appearance, like he'd lost a lot of weight. He looked almost dead when he boarded the airplane, you know, 'cause his eyes were wide open and there was really very little life at all, if any, left in him. He was alive, though, because I did notice his mouth move just a little bit once or twice. As we were taxiing into the customs ramp, the doctor in the back said, just take your time. There's no need to hurry any longer. That's how we knew at that time. He died apparently as we were descending into Houston, just as we were coming in, approaching the airport.
The preliminary autopsy findings demonstrated that Mr. Hughes died of chronic renal disease.
One of the interesting things on that original autopsy was that the report said that he had a very minimal amount of codeine in his body, and it was amount basically commensurate with anyone taking a therapeutic dose of codeine, something a dose that's recommended. But what you see is that the volume he had in his body, that people in the past had died from such volumes. We did the story that he had a potentially lethal dose of codeine in his body, and up until that point that hadn't been reported.
Additionally, concealed in the original autopsy reports were X-rays revealing the remnants of hypodermic needles that had broken off in both of Hughes' arms.
I think you look at the man's physical condition when he arrives in Houston aboard the plane, and I think anybody has to ask the question, how does someone get in this condition?
Can you imagine a man with 7 broken hypodermic needles in his arm? A man who's responsible for having built the biggest medical foundation in the history of man? Having a sore that oozes, a bone that's sticking out of his shoulder?
This is not the picture of someone who is being really cared for. And the question is why?
I've often said that people have asked me, do you think they killed this man? And my answer is a very, I believe, fair one. If sheer negligence qualifies as a weapon, yes, they did.
Aviation, the art of aeronautics, began with the dreamers, inventors, and daredevils who dared to defy gravity. The journey of aviation was nurtured by pioneers like the Wright brothers, whose first flight marked a historic milestone. The role of aircrafts in world wars was groundbreaking, dramatically changing warfare strategies. This initiated a technological evolution in aviation, transforming the simplistic wings of a biplane into the thunderous roar of jet engines. Let's journey through the ages of aviation. Behind every great aircraft, there were great minds. These visionaries, like Sir Frank Whittle, the innovator of the turbojet engine, redefined air travel. Then there's Skunkworks' Kelly Johnson, the genius behind the SR-71 Blackbird. His designs combined speed, stealth, and power, crafting machines that dominated the heavens. The contributions of these pioneers have left an indelible mark on the canvas of aviation, shaping the course of history and inspiring generations of engineers and aviators. Each epoch in aviation history gave birth to extraordinary aircrafts, each with their own unique features and roles. The Lockheed SR-71 Blackbird was a marvel of speed and stealth. The F-105 Thunderchief, a supersonic fighter bomber, was vital in the Vietnam War. The P-51 Mustang, a long-range fighter, was critical in World War II. The P-47 Thunderbolt, a heavyweight fighter, was used extensively in the same war. The A-10 Thunderbolt II, the Warthog, is a close air support icon. The Messerschmitt Me-262 marked a leap forward in aviation technology. Each of these game changers were instrumental in their eras, and their legacies still resonate today. Beyond the game changers, there are those that have transcended their practical roles to become icons, The Concorde was not just an aircraft, it was a supersonic symbol of luxury and speed. The B-52 Stratofortress, a strategic bomber, is an icon of power and resilience. These magnificent machines and others like them have become much more than just aircrafts. They are enduring icons that encapsulate the audacious spirit, the relentless innovation, and the boundless ambition that define the world of aviation. For more amazing aerial footage, and to join us in this incredible journey, check out the DroneScapes YouTube channel.
If you enjoyed this video, please remember to like and subscribe. And as always, thank you for watching.